Good morning. Yeah. This way of recording gives you so many ways of seeing. Okay, I'm picking up where I left off in Joanna Macy's Widening Circles. I'll just read the last paragraph that I think I read last before, and then we'll continue. In the dining room at the farm hung a large framed etching that dated from his and my grandparents' sojourns in Germany. It pictured in shadowy detail another dining room, even plainer than ours, and a peasant family about to sit down. The rough table has only a loaf and pitcher on it, so you can tell they're poor. Yet the father, with his arms wide open, is welcoming a stranger. His words are written out to sea. Komm, Herr Jesu, sei unser Gast. Clearly, it's Jesus who has just walked in. The mother and children raise their eyes from saying grace with looks of disbelief and reverence and delight. I could experience these feelings myself as I gazed at the picture, and I imagined what it would feel like to be sharing what you had to eat with someone who turned out to be God. In the flatness from Albion North to Lake Ontario, even the smallest rise or dip held drama, like the high bridge over the canal, great for flying down on your bike as fast as the wind, or the lazy, slow stream beds, perfect for squatting motionless to hunt tadpoles and crawdads. For all the openness of the land, there were hidden places, derelict barns, abandoned orchards, stands of dark woods that held their own secrets. And you could find them out if you didn't mind getting a little scared and scratched. And everywhere, in every field and ditch, it was busy, not with people and cars and machines, but with the aliveness of earth. As soon as you stop for a second and let it in, that simmering, seething vitality barraged your senses. When I hurried to the outhouse after the long car trip, there it was right away, and very strong too, in the chorus of flies zooming up from below as I lifted the lid, and in the higher whine from the wasp's nest overhead. I had to try and not be nervous as I perched there over the smelly abyss, for I feared the wasps, and also I'd heard from Hardy that escaped convicts sometimes hid beneath privies, figuring they'd be undetected in pits of human excrement. I diverted myself by studying the yellowing pages from old catalogs and Sunday supplements that papered the walls. When I pulled up my pants and went out under the sour cherry trees beside the Pivy, the din of insect life continued all around me. Less menacing now as I listened, it grew louder and wilder. New parts of the orchestra clicked in with new buzzings and dronings of gnats, bees, June bugs, of dragonflies and horseflies and hornets in the grasses around my feet and the cherry branches overhead and in the elderberry bushes behind them, and soon I could hear their chorus coming from farther away, from Ui's garden and beyond, and the hayfields and woods in the distance. I skipped a line. And soon I could hear their chorus coming from farther away, from Ui's garden and the waist-high grasses on the other side, and from the tomato field and the orchard beyond, and the hayfields and woods in the distance. The whole world reverberated with their roar, an ocean of multitudes that could absorb you right into their immeasurable collective presence. Was this always going on? And we were just too busy to hear it, too self-enclosed to hear the world conspiring with itself. When the breakfast dishes were done and beds made, I could head off into the mornings on Spotty, down the road on an errand to town, or out along the rutted edges of the cultivated fields toward open pastures and woodland. Having no one to ride with, I wished for human companions, invented them. In a remote field surrounded by woods, I would persuade Spotty to run, and charging about on my loyal steed, his noble heart pounding with the effort, I would become Joan of Arc, leading her troop into battle, or Scarlett O'Hara, galloping to the rescue of Tara, or Queen of the Amazons, shirt unbuttoned, defending her jungle realm. Often before supper, we'd be underway again, this time to the north pasture to fetch the cows for milking. The small herd, just 9 or 10, included a couple of delicate, pretty-faced Jerseys and 2 or 3 hefty Holsteins. The rest were Guernseys. I left the reins on Spotty's neck because he knew better than I how to round them up and keep them moving. Out the pasture gate and down the long grassy lane to the road, and then another quarter-mile by road till they reached their stanchions in the big barn. The cows took their time about it. So I would just lounge on Spotty and watch the sky turn colors, the land soften. Whenever someone came with me to fetch the cows, we would go on foot. And once, at least, that someone was my father. I know that because I learned a poem from him then. Walking up the long lane to the pasture, he spied across a neighboring field a tree all overgrown with vines. See yonder ivy-mantled tower, he laughed. That's where the moping owl doth complain. That was from Gray's Elegy in a country churchyard, he said. And he soon had me repeating the opening lines with him. Curfew tolls the knell of parting day. The lowering herd winds slowly o'er the lay. Papa loved poetry. When he was in a good mood, he would recite whole passages from Tennyson and Coleridge, Matthew Arnold, Rupert Brooke, and the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. He would talk about Professor Billy Phelps and the grand, exciting course he taught at Yale. I began to think that if Papa had become a professor of literature instead of working in stocks and bonds, he would have found more gladness in himself. In New York City at the Lycée, too, I began learning poetry by heart, a bunch of it for recitation every Friday. The very first poem I committed to memory was by La Fontaine from Aesop's fable about the crow and the fox. Papa would have me recite it for guests. Our first year in New York, he still invited people home. I would stand in front of some business friend of his who might not know a word of French and launch myself into the sonnet. I don't speak French. I will slaughter this. Maître Corbeau sur un arbre perché tenait en son bec un fromage. When the fox saw the crow with a cheese in his beak, he called up to him, "Oh, you have such a beautiful voice. Please sing for us." The stupid crow fell for the flattery, dropped the cheese, and the fox straightaway ran off with it. When Papa asked me to recite before guests, I, too, opened my mouth. But there was nothing for me to lose, no cheese to drop. And for a moment, there was his smile. For a moment, he would see me and hear me, though I sensed even then that it was not me he was hearing, but the language he loved that he had learned as a child in Paris. To live in the city surrounded by sooty concrete, to have to wait to be accompanied to the park each time I wanted to play outside, felt hideously confining. Though we found a good hill for sledding and a real Egyptian tomb to walk around in at the Metropolitan Museum nearby. From my bed in the converted dining room I shared with John, I could see the illumined tower of the Empire State Building glowing in the evening sky. At bedtime with John and me nestled with her against the pillows, Mama would tell us the latest adventures of the rabbit who lived there. The Empire State Building was this rabbit's home. And so, as you would expect, he was quite sophisticated. But even relaxed moments like these were overshadowed with tension. The apartment began to feel like a pressure cooker. After a day at the office, Papa shut himself in his separate bedroom with the air filter, and we kept our voices down. From the moment we heard his keys in the front door, we tried to do nothing that might set him off. But often late at night, his shouting would jar us awake. I knew Mama was in there with him in his room across the hall, though I couldn't hear her voice. That was when John and I would put our pillows for saddles over the foot railings of our beds and ride off together into the night. New adventures awaited us always, and it felt so good to do something, rocking in a canter or crouching forward in a flat-out gallop, hanging onto the reins looped around the bedpost. Except for Manhattan's night glow through the window, we rode in darkness, unable to see each other's faces, calling to each other in whispers as we crossed prairies and forded rivers and raced up rocky gulches with our posses and patrols, just in time, usually, to save people. After a while, those night rides became harder to sustain. I would find myself standing in the hall by that closed door, not wanting to hear, but needing to know. My father, I thought, could speak even more forcefully and persuasively than all of the preachers he descended from. And once he started, it was hard for him to stop. He could take the mildest mistake and turn it into a terrible offense. And you'd believe him, or at least I was afraid that Mama would believe him, the way she kept apologizing. It sounded as if she did. Apologies didn't stop Papa anyway. He never seemed to think you were sorry enough. Sometimes, standing in the hall by his bedroom door, I would start hammering on it with my fist, shouting so he could hear me over his own voice, shouting at him to leave Mama alone. When Papa yanked the door open and advanced on me, Mama would plead with me to run off, looking at me as if I were causing her the most anguish of all. The few times my father hit me hurt less than the tongue lashings, but they left me with a fear that was hard to shake. On our first Christmas Eve in New York, we were decorating the tree when Papa came home from an office party. He seemed unusually friendly and stayed in the living room, lounging on the sofa to watch us. I pulled at him to join us at the tree and teased him when he refused, saying he was a stick in the mud who never wanted to have fun with us. That's when he started after me. What I remember most is how his blows sent me sprawling and spinning, bouncing off the walls of the narrow hallway, and how when I scrambled to lock myself in Mama's room at the far end, he knocked the door down. He did it with his back by bracing his feet against the opposite wall and pushing. The door, as I watched from inside, bent inwards very slowly, creaking and straining at the hinges more and more until it couldn't hold out any longer and just gave way. I can't remember what happened next. No one ever talked about it afterwards. No one ever talked about any suffering in our family, except Mama to me in the privacy of her room. She had begun confiding in me, pouring out her distress and desperation, and they became my own, became a dense mass inside me, growing heavier as I saw how poorly Mama defended herself. I began to fear that my father would break her spirit in some irreparable way. I tried as hard as I could to get her to stand up to him. Why don't you stand up for Mama? Don't you see what's going on? Don't you care? I cried at Hardy one afternoon when we were alone in the apartment. He was home from school with a broken arm, and I seized the chance to speak of my fear for Mama. When Hardy said nothing, I shoved him in anger, and he fell off his chair onto the cast around his arm. I was horrified at my own vehemence. Hardy was the precious genius of the family, and now I damaged him. But as I helped him up, he shook his head at my apologies. I don't blame you for being worried, and I haven't been much help, he said. That, to my recollection, was the only time he actually acknowledged to me that things were hard. John, at 6, was too young to turn to except for diversion. Already he was developing his own characteristic response to stress, to ignore it with buoyancy and jokes. Even Mama, except when alone with me, appeared trouble-free. Mostly she followed her own dictum. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Only Berthy, a Swiss woman who came one season to cook and clean, was bold enough to name the suffering. She was brawny and outspoken with a faint mustache, and it awed me that she was not intimidated by my father. Perched on a kitchen stool, I listened intently as she told of going right down to Wall Street to demand the money he owed her and to admonish him for the way he treated his wife. Then Berthy said to me, I worry about what he will drive her to do. From this height, it would be so easy. The shaking inside me that began then came not from surprise, but confirmation, as if I already had been harboring the fears Berthy brought to the surface. Once Berthy was dismissed, as soon as she was, to whom could I speak those fears? I didn't want to add to Mama's anguish by revealing the extent of my own, or for that matter, to give her any ideas. But now, each afternoon when I came home from school, I would run to look in all the rooms, and if I did not find my mother, peer out the window to the city pavement 13 stories below. We'll pick up with 1939 in Joanna's story of Widening Circles. Reading calms me, I've noticed, and reading the words of my teachers and my teachers' teachers helps me a great deal in this coronavirus time, in this corona chapter of our lives. San Mateo County, which is the county Pacifica is in, has extended the stay-in-place orders till May 3rd. The shelter-in-place orders till May 3rd. So all of April. And they've drawn like a 5-mile circle around your residence and said you have to stay within that. And if you're beyond that, you've gone too far and it's a misdemeanor. And that is troubling to me. So I'm reading and going to the studio and showing up on YouTube to manage my coronavirus distress. Thanks for watching if you do. Blessings.